All right, great. Thank you for the introduction. Today I'm going to be talking about the latest analysis for our project. I'm going to give a little bit of background on the U.S. COVID-19 County Policy, or UCCP database. I'm going to talk a little bit about the preliminary results, and then I'm going to talk about the new analysis, which involves sequence analysis and cluster analysis, to describe trajectories and patterns of county policymaking across the country during this time. And then I'm going to tell you a little bit about next steps in our project. So some of you may have heard me discuss the UCCP database before today, but as a reminder, our objectives are to document U.S. county level policies during the COVID-19 pandemic to achieve a few broader goals. First, we hope to be able to better characterize geographic and temporal variation in policies, which is the focus of my presentation today. And then second, we're going to be examining the effects of these policies on mental health, and other people can look at other health and social outcomes by linking the UCCP database with national survey and administrative data sets that include the health outcomes of interest. And then third, which is sort of the nerdy methodological aim, is we want to make sure that ours and other researchers' policy evaluations adequately account for confounding, or endogeneity, as our economist friends like to call it. So in other words, we want to reduce the chances that we attribute effects to just one policy, like workplace closures, when other co-occurring policies like eviction moratoria may also contribute to the outcomes being examined. And to do that, we need to know what policies were in place at any given time in a particular county, which the UCCP database should hopefully help with. So to give a little bit more detail on the database, our team is gathering data on 27 different policies for over 300 counties across all 50 states and Washington, D.C. These counties are shown in blue on the map. And while there's over 3,000 counties in the U.S., these 300-ish counties include more than half the U.S. population, and they're diverse with respect to geography, race, ethnicity, and politics. This is a randomly selected sample of counties. We sampled proportional to county population and oversampled counties higher on the CDC's Social Vulnerability Index, while ensuring at least one county per state, and trying to have a higher selection also of non-metro counties. The time period we cover is 2020 to 2021, during which data are collected on these policies at weekly intervals. So to try to preempt some of the questions that I always get, if you want to read more about the UCCP database and which counties are included and details on downloading the data for yourself, I've included a QR code, which is being blocked by the little Zoom box. But I'll have the website link at the end too. That way you can take a look at the database details before the data are officially released. So in terms of the policies included in the database, these are grouped into 3 domains. As I mentioned, these were pretty closely based on the similar Oxford database that gathers national and state level policies. The 3 main domains are containment and closure, economic response, and public health policies. Again, if you can get to our website through the QR code later or the website link, you'll be able to see more details about what each of these indicators covers and how the data were collected. Again, the main difference between the Oxford database and ours is we included more economic response policies, and there were some policies that just aren't relevant for counties. So like number 7 in that first column, travel controls, that's not something really done at the county level. That's more of a macro geography area. So here's a preliminary result from the first wave of data collection, which included 100 counties in 7 states at just one point in time in early 2021. The darker greens that more policies were passed in those counties, and lighter colors mean fewer policies were passed. And white here indicates that they weren't included in that preliminary data set. So just so you know, these counties don't totally overlap with those that are going to be included in the final UCCP database, but this is just to give you a sense of the variation we see both within and across states. And you can read more about this preliminary study in our first paper, this one in BMC Public Health. So of course, that original analysis only looked at one point in time, and it provided the impetus for the research question that I'll be addressing with today's presentation. Namely, I'll be describing the longitudinal trajectories of local county policymaking in the US during the COVID pandemic. So since the UCCP database collection is not complete yet, for this analysis, we used data from the first 197 counties, which were in 39 states, and we were using the time period January 2020 to June 2021. So to characterize policy trajectories, we first implemented sequence analysis and then cluster analysis. So for those not familiar with these techniques, they were actually originally developed by geneticists to describe DNA sequences, but they're now increasingly being applied in public health and other social science research to simplify large data sets like ours. In our case, we have over 5,000 county week data points. So first, instead of looking at all 27 policies separately, we created composite measures of policy comprehensiveness for each county and each week. And we did this for overall policy comprehensiveness as well as in the 3 policy domains. And then each of these indices were split into tertiles of low, medium, or high comprehensiveness. The sequence analysis algorithm then assesses how frequent certain transitions are. So in other words, how often do counties move from low to medium or low to high policy comprehensiveness across weeks? And then less frequent transitions that are observed are considered more costly. And then the algorithm implements optimal matching to quantify how different the county's trajectories are from one another in terms of this costliness. And then finally, we implemented cluster analysis, which groups counties together based on their similar trajectories. So this is the first of our results. This is known as an index plot, and it shows the trajectory of every county in the database across the study period. So every row on the x-axis, on the y-axis is a county, and along the x-axis is time in weeks. Blue indicates low policy comprehensiveness, yellow is medium, red is high. And we've inserted some vertical dashed lines just to help orient you to what was going on nationally at this time. So you can immediately see for the overall policy comprehensiveness index, there was tremendous variation across counties in their individual trajectories. Of course, not much going on policy-wise during January to February of 2020, the very beginning. But then some counties preempting the national emergency announcement in March and already implementing their own policies. Then you can see there was a solid block of counties that had fairly comprehensive policymaking throughout this period along the bottom, and also a fair number along the top who had low comprehensiveness right through the end. This is the same index plot, but looking at containment and closure policies. Here, there's a little bit less variation with many more counties with solidly high comprehensiveness during the early period and maybe more tapering off towards the middle of 2021. Next is economic response policies, including things like housing, income, and nutrition support. There were many fewer counties that implemented policies in this domain. You could argue that this is because states and the federal government took more action here, but in our data set, we did observe a fair number of counties who implemented many of these policies to support their residents. So instead, it might reflect less attention to providing direct support to buffer families from the economic and social hardships of the pandemic, which I would argue has been a problem with the US safety net even before COVID-19. And finally, we have the index plot of public health policies, which you can see took a little bit longer to kick in than the containment and closure policies, but then were more consistently implemented later in the study period. For example, one thing to note is an almost uniform increase in comprehensiveness in December of 2020, which probably represents the vaccine rollout, since vaccine is one of the topic areas covered by this policy domain. So the next set of results I have are called modal plots produced by the cluster analysis, and it condenses the trajectories of all these 197 counties into a smaller, more interpretable number based on their similarities. So each of these rows represents the modal or most common trajectory for a given cluster. And we've assigned these cluster names just to help with interpretation, and you can also see how many counties were in each cluster on the left there, the sample sizes. So for this overall policy comprehensiveness index, we see that 50 counties were consistently low 50 counties were consistently high throughout the study period, and another 50 actually were consistently low, those bottom 2 rows, or with very late medium policy action, and the rest had different levels of intermittent policy comprehensiveness. For containment and closure, almost 100 counties, those top 2 rows, had consistently or mostly high comprehensiveness. 43, the bottom 2 rows, had low or mostly low comprehensiveness. And again, the rest had varying degrees of intermittent comprehensiveness. For economic response, consistent with that index plot, only about 38 had consistently high comprehensiveness, while nearly 100, those rows near the bottom, were consistently or mostly low, and the remaining 60 or so had varying degrees of comprehensiveness. And then finally, here's the modal plot for the public health policymaking, showing 34, I'm sorry, it's the second row here, with mostly high comprehensive policymaking, another 100 that eventually got to high comprehensiveness, and then about 60 who were consistently or mostly low throughout. So there's so many more results for this analysis that I wasn't able to touch on today because of the time limitations. For example, as in that preliminary analysis, we found substantial variation in policy trajectories within and across states. We have some nice maps that I'm not able to show you. We also examined the correlation of county socio-demographic characteristics with policy comprehensiveness. And we found that those with less comprehensive policymaking across all the domains had higher poverty rates, had lower population density, and a higher percentage of white residents. So this paper has just been submitted to a journal, so feel free to follow up with me or on our website in a few months to read the full results. And then in terms of our team's next steps, we are, of course, continuing data collection and quality checks. I think this is outdated. We're now probably closer to 275 of the 309 counties finished, and we anticipate the full database will be ready to share publicly this December. Sorry, the QR code is blocked. Otherwise, you'd be able to click on the link. But again, I'm about to put the website up where you can download that first preliminary wave of data from 100 counties for a sneak preview. And we are so lucky that the folks at ICPSR are going to be helping us curate the data set to make it more digestible and usable to a wider audience as soon as it's ready. In terms of our plans, we then are going to link these policy data with national survey and administrative data to look at the effects on racial and socioeconomic inequities in mental health and healthcare utilization. And finally, we've been working with a policymaker advisory board throughout who helped us to design the data collection and sort of tailor our list of policies, and who will hopefully be informing analysis and dissemination. I want to thank my co-authors, especially Amy Chang, who led the analysis, Lucia Paca and Anusha Vable, who were super informative on sequence analysis. If anybody thinks they want to use it for their future research, I didn't ask their permission, but you should reach out to them to see if you want to use it in your projects. And then the rest of our research team. A big shout out especially to our policy data collectors, who their job is just so amazing to build this database. And then of course the funders of this work. Thank you. Here, as promised, is the website. You can click on that and then just navigate to the COVID-19 section to get to where the QR code was supposed to have taken you. And yeah, feel free to reach out after today or during the Q&A. Thanks.